Hello. So I did a video there about 2-3 weeks ago where I did an hour-long tutorial for Surge where I went into pretty much every detail of the synth and how it works, and a lot of people enjoyed that video, and I got a lot of requests to do Vital. Now there's a lot of Vital content already out there. There's a lot of good videos about Vital, but people requested it, so ask and you shall receive. This video will be covering Vital in detail, so I'm going to be going through pretty much I would say everything in Vital, explaining it quite in depth, including the Wavetable Editor and some tips and tricks that you can do that aren't maybe particularly obvious. So yeah, the video is aimed at everybody, so you can be like a beginner or quite advanced and you'll probably still get something out of it. The one thing I will say is if you're like a beginner, it's probably not going to be that good. I'm not going to be explaining what's an LFO, what's a filter, what's an oscillator, so I'm going to assume a certain amount of knowledge, but other than that I'm going to be explaining what everything does. So this will be as long as it is. It's probably going to be quite long, probably over an hour, so I will timestamp it so that if you want to come back and go to relevant parts, you can just click on what you want to see, and that's going to be it. So let's start. Okay, so I'm just going to start at the top panel here and then we'll work our way down. So you've got the Vital logo here. You can click on this, you can check for updates or not check for updates. You can also scale it here to whatever size you might want, but you can also, and probably would prefer, to scale it using the down here thing. Sometimes this can be a bit glitchy if you set a particular, so like if you set a, let's set like 400% here, or just 200%. Or 135 maybe. Sometimes if you scale it, it doesn't scale properly. It will just close the window up, but sometimes it works, so just be careful. Yeah, there, see? Sometimes it does stuff like that, but generally if you resize it in here, that'll fix the issue. So let's keep it at 135 for now. So we got the voice tab here. This is everything got to do with our synth voices. So oscillators, modulators, filters, and yeah, these are just more modulators, and there's some additional controls down here. Effects is going to let you turn on all your effects and mess about with them. Then matrix is basically when you assign something here. So say if I were to assign this to the volume, it's going to pop up here in the matrix. So let's assign it to the pan, and if we go to the matrix, you can see that's here. There is also some additional control in here that I'll go into when I get to the mod matrix. But for now, you got your effects, your mod matrix, and then there's the advanced tab. In the advanced tab, it covers pretty much everything got to do with, so advanced Unison stuff, oversampling, how voices are handled. You got a little analyzer in here, and that's basically it for the advanced tab. So next, you got your presets. So there's two little arrows here, so you can move through your presets and, you know, select the coolest one and put it in your hit. Then you can click on this tab here, and this will bring you into the preset browser where you can set favorites if you really like. So let's say we really like AEO. We can set that as our favorite by clicking the little star, and then it'll come up in our favorites. Then there is just a little search bar over here, so you can search for whatever presets you might want. You could set them by if you want a bass or if you want a lead, and you've got who the presets are by down here. So if you want to search by person, you can just click on their little tab and it will come up with all the presets that they have made. Then obviously if you set things as favorites, they'll come up here if you select your favorites. So there you go. Let's unfavorite all of those. I'm sure they're great, but that's pretty much it. The other thing is, if you say you're on, you know, Afro's presets and you're loading Screech bass and you're like, oh man, that's sick, Afro's a genius, how do I get to him? You can click on this and that will bring you to the Vital website where if there's presets available you can get them. So let's just initialize the patch here, which is a good time to bring you into this little menu here. So if you click on this, but it's also available if you just right click on this bar here, you get a little menu with some extra options, so you can browse presets or it'll just bring you to the preset page. You can save a preset, you can open an external preset which will let you load a preset from a file, so it'll open your file system here. Then you can export a preset if you've got one made. You can import a Vital bank, which I'm not going to go into right now, but there's this basically this format that lets you make banks of presets, and you can import them and export them from Vital. I won't be covering that in this video. If you want to see it, I can put in another video, but it's very simple. Then you can initialize the preset, which will bring you back to the default patch. You can load a tuning file, which will allow you to tune Vital differently to equal temperament. And then you can log out as me or whoever you are. Then there is just a little volume thing here, so it just shows you your volume. You can turn it up and down to master volume. Then you've got an oscilloscope here, which if you click on it, also is a spectrogram. So you can switch between those. Those are both also available in the advanced tab here as well. Then next, we'll just go through the macros and stuff here just because they're right here. So macros basically allow you to control multiple parameters at once. So let's say we could attach this to the level and maybe turn on the filter here. We could attach it to the cutoff, and then it will control those parameters all at once. This can be mapped to anything, including other modulators, or even things like, let's take it off that because that's just going to make it difficult to hear, but you can even map it to things like your effects. So like, and of course it can also be mapped to Modmatrix amounts. So this is a bit of a weird way of approaching a macro to macro itself, but you can do it. So pretty much any value that's set to anything here in the mod matrix can be set to the macro. Even some of the stuff here in the advanced tab can be set to it. So let's just turn on some Unison quickly just to show you that. So if I take my macro here, you can see I can actually modulate a lot of these, including the master tuning, which is down here. So instead of tuning each oscillator itself, you can come to the advanced tab and you have access to the master tuning. It's probably a slightly better way of doing it, and you can attach it to the advanced Unison settings. This is true for every modulator, so the envelopes, the LFOs, all of that, the random modulators, even the ones like velocity and stuff, they can all be mapped to any of the values that I just showed you here. Okay, so let's load that initialized patch again. The only other thing to show you about the macros is that if you click this little pencil here, you can rename them. One other thing to note, I suppose, I'll go into this more when I'm talking about the mod matrix, but if I map the macro, let's just map it here to the filter. So if I map it to the filter here, by default, it's just going to go kind of linearly. You can, of course, change that simply here by just editing that, so you can make it exponential or whatever you want to do there. You can also do things like maybe let's draw in some steps here. So down here in the mod remap, you can basically turn your macro into whatever kind of shape you want. You have the exact same controls as the LFO. You could draw in a bunch of steps here, or you could draw in some like crazier wave shapes. Let's get like a triangle here. So now our macro, if we go through it, is going to follow that shape. So whilst there is only 4 macros here, if combined with this mod remap section, you can basically have them generate an infinite amount of macro shapes. Well, not infinite, there's only 64 slots, but a lot more than you would need for most things. So just below the macros here, you've got a pitch wheel modifier, so you can obviously modify the pitch with your pitch wheel by default, but you can also map that to stuff. So let's say we had Unison turned on here, and let's map the pitch wheel here to the detune. So as I pitch up, it's also gonna increase the Unison detune amount. The pitch bend amount is sorry, not in the advanced tab, it's just down here. So you've got the number of voices here, and then you've got the pitch bend amount. So right now it's 2, but you can set that all the way up to however many you want. I think it goes up to 48, yeah. So that's the pitch bend, which you can also use as a modulator, which is quite cool. The other thing you have here is the mod wheel. So just your mod wheel can be mapped to whatever you want. Again, it's the same as with the macros. You can map it to whatever you want. So moving along here to the oscillator section and the sampler, I guess. You've got three oscillators that are essentially identical. The only way in which they differ is they have different kind of routings here. So if you're doing like FM, you're just going to have different options for which oscillators you can FM, because it doesn't FM itself in this menu. But other than that, they are pretty much completely identical. The controls that you've got here is a level for the oscillator, then you got a pan, pretty self-explanatory. You've got a fine tune, which goes plus and minus 100 cents, and you've got the main quantized transpose here, which goes all the way up to 48 and down to 48 in semitones. And then you've got this little pitch thing here. So what this does is, if I modulate the pitch here, so let's take this LFO1 and drag and drop it over onto the pitch. It's not quantized when it's modulated like that. It's just going to pitch up like that. But if I go to the transpose snap here, I can select sort of intervals that I want it to. So by default, this is laid out like a piano keyboard here. So by default, what it does is, this is my first note. So whatever my first note is, it will transpose up. So this isn't actually C, this is just my root note, and then we're say go up a third, and then we'll go up a fifth, and then we'll go up to the seventh. So we've got our major seventh chord there. And it will do that no matter what key I hit. If I hit this global snap button, this note actually is C no matter what key I hit. So if I hit different keys here, it's always going to be the same. The only time it will change is if I move octave. So yeah, that's the transpose snap. That's available for all oscillators. So you can draw in different scales here, different chords and stuff like that. And it will, of course, move up octaves according to how much you've modulated the pitch here. Let's just initialize that again. So that's this pitch section up here. Then below the level and the pan, you've got routing. So you can route this oscillator independently of the other oscillators. So by default, it goes to filter 1. So if I turn on filter 1, it's routed there. And if I route it to filter 2, it's no longer routed to filter 1 until I turn on filter 2. And then it's routed to that. You can also bypass the filters and go straight to the effects. You can also route it to both filters in parallel. So it's going to go to both of these filters at the same time. Or you can send it directly to the effects, in which case neither of the filters are going to affect it. Or you can make it go directly out, which will also bypass the effects. So you might want to do that if you're using the oscillator as a sub or something like that. That is it for the routing. Just the other thing about the routing is, if you want to, an additional way to route is you can do it here in the filters. So I can route oscillator 1, you see here. I can click it, or I can click oscillator 1 here, and then it's being routed to 1 and 2. And if I turn this off, it just changes automatically there. This routing is done independently for each oscillator, as I said. So by default, the second two oscillators aren't routed through the filters. They just go to the effects. But we could say send oscillator 2 to filter 2, and oscillator 3 could go directly out, and then oscillator 1 could go through oscillator 1 and 2. You can route it whatever way you want. Same with the sampler here. So whatever sample you've got loaded in here, you can send wherever you want independently. Just while I'm talking about routing, you could also, for instance, let's just reset the patch here. So let's initialize this, and let's route this to filter 2. So filter 2 is now, it has now got oscillator 1 going through it. So if I turn on filter 1 now, I can also route filter 2 into filter 1. So let's just put a weird like phaser filter on here. So now oscillator 1 is going through oscillator 2, and then it's going through oscillator 1. And the same option is available here on oscillator 2, so I could feed filter 1 into filter 1 into filter 2. So by doing that, you can pretty much route the oscillators to the filters in any way that you want, and you can also run them in serial or parallel, kind of in whatever way you want to. So there's a lot of flexibility there in terms of how you route the filters, but we'll come back to those in a second. The next thing you've got here is your wave display. So if I load up a wavetable here, you've got a sort of visual representation of the wave. It's kind of obvious, I suppose. And then as you move through the wavetable, that'll change. You have different views here. So you got 2D, you got 3D, which is definitely cooler. And then you've got this, I guess, spectrum view. So yeah, those are the three sort of viewing options. There's a little pencil in here. This will take you to the Wavetable Editor, which we will cover at the end of the video. And then you modulate through the wavetable here by moving this little frame thingy. Just to show you, there is another option that pops up here when you've got the phase distortion modes or the phase changing modes active here. So let's just turn on bend here, and then you can see we've got a new little control here. This control is the phase of the oscillator against this phase distortion. So we can change the phase of the oscillator up here in the phase tab by changing its phase. But this, if I bend this, changes the way that the oscillator goes into that bend. So a different part of the waveform is being focused through this bend now. And for a lot of these, it does dramatically change the sound. So formant, you can see it doesn't really do that much when it's up at the high settings. It's a little bit more subtle on formant in general. Quantize, there's a bit of a change in the sound there. So just experiment with that. Sometimes you might want to put on, say, your squeeze or something, but you also want to be messing with this this phase control down here. So that is everything in this view. Then we come over to the Unison tab. So the Unison tab, you can have up to 16 voices. And so then you've got a little control here for the Unison voices. So you can kind of change how they're distributed by dragging up and down on this little graphic here in the middle. And change how kind of densely they are packed into different parts. You've also got Unison detune here. So those are pretty standard controls. There are a lot of advanced controls for the Unison in the Advanced tab here, which I will go into in a second. For now, just know that you can also change the range of this detune. So it's pretty detuned there, but you can go way further by changing the detune range, or you can go way subtler. So yeah, that's the Unison. Then after that, we've got the Phase tab. So phase is basically just controlling where the oscillator is starting. By default, the oscillator starts on a random phase each time you hit a note. If you want it to start on the exact same phase every time you hit a note, then you bring this randomization value down to 0, and then it will start in a completely even phase each time. The phase then is controlled by this phase parameter, which means that if you have something at audio rate, which we're going to look at later, you can phase modulate the oscillator, which is basically what FM is. Then finally, we have the Spectral Morph tab. So let's load a complex wavetable, just have a look. I'm not going to go into like individually the different things that these do, just because I could go into that in a different video, and honestly most of the time you kind of just want to experiment with these. But basically what these do is, in Serum you have the phase distortion, which we also have here, which kind of messes around with the phase of the oscillator and distorts it in different ways. The this sort of spectral morphing section here, what it does is it messes more additively with the frequencies. So we have some basic stuff here like low pass, which is just a basic low pass filter, and of course high pass. And then we've got other weird stuff like vocal, and there's There's random amplitudes here. So what these are doing is they are basically going into the FFT here. So we've got this area in here where we can edit the individual harmonics that are happening in our waveform. So you can see in this waveform it's showing all the harmonics here, and it's basically applying effects to those and to their phase as well, so you can get some pretty weird effects with it. There's a bunch of different stuff in here. Some of them are more subtle and some of them just, so like that one is kind of, I guess, more subtle, but then you have ones like random amplitudes which just make the waveform completely unrecognizable. So that is the spectral morphing section. Then you have your wave morph here. This has more standard effects like what you get in Serum, so it's got like stuff like synth there. You've got bend, plus and minus, and again that's changed here with the phase, and other stuff like squeeze, pulse, which kind of pulse width modulates it. Again, I'm not going to go into these in detail. These are things that are sort of, they're available in Serum. I think people are kind of familiar with these, but they each have a different effect. If you want me to go into those in detail, I can. But yeah, most of the time with these kind of things, you just kind of want to play around with them anyway. But the other options that are available in here is you can FM, so you can pull an FM source from, say, oscillator 2. So the oscillator has to be on, so you have to turn it on and then just turn it down, so that you can't hear it. So let's change that to like a sine wave there. And it's going to FM from that. You could also FM from oscillator 3, which, as you can see, if it's not on, it's going to have no effect. Same with the sample. So it's just going to have no effect if you don't have it turned on. So the other thing you've got here is you've got ring modulation. So let's ring modulate from the sample, and let's turn that down so we can't hear it. So ring modulation is where FM is messing with frequency. Well, it's really messing with phase, but it has the effect of, I suppose, messing with the frequency. Ring modulation is messing with the volume in the oscillator. So we're now using this, in this case, white noise. We're using it to modulate the volume of our oscillator 1 here. And yeah, that is pretty much it in terms of all of the stuff that's available here in the oscillator tab. As I said, the 3 oscillators they're pretty much the same. You can copy and paste between different oscillators as well. So I could copy this one and I could paste it onto this one. You can initialize the oscillators here if you right click on the main menu here. So the other thing I want to show you here is you can also resynthesize the preset to a wavetable. So let's mess around with this saw wave a bit. Let's get random amplitudes going here, and let's get maybe squeeze too, and let's modulate those with this LFO here, and let's pull that on there and on there, and maybe even let's add some Unison to make it kind of phasey. Okay, so now we've got this. Maybe we'll even mess with this phase here as well. Okay, so now we've got this weird thing. So if we right click here on oscillator 2 and go resynthesize preset to wavetable, what it's going to do is it's going to play through that, and then on this oscillator here we get what we just made there. Let's modulate this. What we just made there has been resynthesized into this second oscillator here. So the final option, you can save a wavetable here as well. So if you've made a wavetable you like, you can save to wavetables, and you can enter the name of it, and that will save it to your wavetables, which are saved up here. So you can see there's these presets, and I've got a user folder here, and here's one that I made earlier. So I just saved this as a wavetable. So there you go. There's that's just how you save to wavetables. You can have as many folders in here as you want and organize them however you please, but I'm not going to go into that too much. So the final thing you can do on the oscillators, you can do this text to wavetable if you've got a premium version of Vital. Text to wavetable here will just let you type in something and it will turn that into a speech. So it'll turn it into a wavetable basically. So let's type in something here and turn it into a wavetable. So there we go. Smash like girl shams. So it's kind of like having a little vocoder in there. Smash like. That's a really good wavetable. Smash like. So this is only available with the premium version of Vital, so you have to be on the subscription plan or have paid, and then you get a certain amount of text to wavetable. I think the primary reason for that is this uses like an online resource to actually turn the speech into a wavetable. Let's just try one more here. So let's try this one. Subscribe. So yeah, they actually sound really good. Like usually an awful lot of these text to wavetable things really sound nothing like what you typed in, but this one is pretty good. So that is text to wavetable. Okay, so that's it for the regular oscillators. Next we've got the sampler. This is very simple. Same sort of idea as the oscillator with the pan and the level and the pitch and the routing here. You can do all the same stuff, but it plays samples instead of oscillators. So as you can see, there's a couple of controls in here that are different. So you've got looping, which you can turn on. If you've got looping turned off, it will just play to the end of the sample and then it will stop. If you've got it turned on, it will loop around again, but we're not going to wait for that to happen. Then you've got the loop modes. So for instance, if we turn this on, instead of looping and then playing again and then playing again, it will go to the end and then it will reverse and play the sample backward. Then we've got this here, which will start the sample at a random point every time we hit a key instead of at the start. So I've got it turned off. Every time I hit a note, it starts at the start of the sample. If I turn it on, it's going to be a random point every time. And finally here you've got the key track. So depending on what key I hit, it's going to pitch the sample. And you can, of course, bring your own samples in here. So let's get some sort of a loop here from Bitwig. I don't know, I'll just pick whatever this is. So you got this. And of course you can modulate all this stuff. So maybe you want to modulate the pitch or something like that. We can do that here. So let's modulate it with this LFO. Bring it down. Bring it down here. And even if you try out some of these LFO presets, let's get something weird. You can get weird sounds out of just if you spend a lot of time setting it up, you can get like weird glitchy loops and stuff like that, but they're kind of hard to get in time. But you can make loads of weird sound effects just by messing around with that. And that is it for the sampler. You've got some factory samples in here. You can load your own ones in, but the easiest way to load your own ones in is just to drag them, and then they'll be in there. Next thing we're going to go over is the filters. They're not complicated at all. So you've got a bunch of different modes here. We'll go into that in a second, but you've got some primary controls for the filters. I've already explained how the routing works down here. So this top one morphs. So on the analog ones, it's going to morph between like a low pass, a band pass, and a high pass. Then your bottom one here is your cutoff. And then you got your resonance here. Then on the bottom here, you got drive, which is going to drive into the filter. So this kind of brings out the character of the filter more and distorts it. So when you go through these different modes here, by the way, on the analog here, you can select if it's 12 dB, 24 dB, and you've got other sort of options. So you can pick a notch instead. And that's going to give you different filter options up here for the morphing. And the same with here with this notch spread. So there's a bunch of different options in there. And then you've got ones like this dirty one, which is just the same basic idea, but it sounds a bit different. So let's make it a low pass. So it's a bit kind of grittier and more distorted than just the regular analog one. You got a ladder filter here, which is modeled on the famous ladder filter. Similar options in there. Digital filter, which again is quite a bit dirtier than the regular ones. Diode. Let's pull down the drive on that one. So you can see the drive sounds completely different on all of these. They just have a different character. Then you move away from the different character filters into the sort of weirder filters like formant. So the bottom cutoff here on the formant is going to sort of change what the formant is. And then this is going to change, this top one is going to change kind of where in the frequency range we are. Just a cool trick with this formant one as well. If you want to keep the if you're keeping the synth in mono, you can kind of turn this into like a bunch of formant filters. Well, not a bunch, 2 formant filters on top of each other. So if I pull down this spread, which will just make the whole patch mono, and then I bring in the stereo, you can do this with any of the filters. You can turn one filter into 2 filters. And you can spread any of the parameters you want. So let's also spread the vowel type here. And let's spread that a bit more. So in that way, if you don't mind the patch being a mono, so you lose your kind of stereo width and stuff like that, you can kind of have 4 filters here by modulating it with the stereo. And of course, if you don't want it to be in mono, now you have individual control over stereo filters. So the cool thing about this is if you go to the analog one here, you can obviously have stereo control over the filters. So let's just remap those now in a sec. So let's pull down this resonance here, and let's pull down the low pass, and then let's stereo the type of filter. Right? So now we got low pass in one ear and band pass in the other ear. And then again, if we pull down that spread, we've got those 2 on top of each other, which isn't too exciting with these particular filter types. But that's just you can do lots of cool tricks with the modulation on these as well. You can also frequency modulate the filters with the LFOs, which I'll show off in a second. But just back to the filters again. So you've got these 2 different types of formants, which just sound different. They've kind of got different bell sounds. And then the last control for them is the peak down here, and the spread too. And again, that sounds different on the other ones. So you got a massive amount of control here over your formant filters. Then you've got comb filters. So I'm not going to go into every single one of these, but generally you've got your cutoff here, and then you can kind of blend the comb in with the sort of regular filter. And then you've got sort of your resonance, so you can have a positive comb or a negative comb. And here we've got more of a flanger idea. Again, the controls are similar. The thing to note here is the display itself is like an XY controller, so you can control the resonance and the cutoff. So let's try this one. Now, so you've got a bunch of different comb flanger ideas in here, and then finally you've got these phaser ones. So these are just phaser filters, which you can also drive, and you can change the number of notches in the phaser as well, up here on top, and its resonance is also controllable here. So you've got the exact same thing in filter 1 and filter 2. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for the filters. Filter 2 is pretty much identical. The only difference is which one can be routed into which one. You can also key track the filter, so the cutoff will change as you move up the keyboard. Let's turn that down a bit. The drive is kind of loud. So yeah, that is the filters. You can also key track it manually. If you take this note modifier over here, you can key track anything you want. So you can key track the cutoff like you can with the regular key track. You can also key track things like the number of notches here, and get a different sound as you go up the keyboard. So next we're going to move on to the modulators, and we'll start with the simplest one, the envelope. So if you don't know what an envelope is, I'm not going to explain it in detail here. These are just standard envelopes with an attack, decay, and a release, and they also have a hold parameter just before the decay kicks in. These can be modulated anywhere, as I showed off with the macros. Just a note on modulating things. If you drag and drop something to a thing you want to modulate, so let's turn on the filter. If you drag and drop it, if you hold your mouse cursor while you're doing it, it'll sort of let you preview that modulation, but you don't have to commit, which is pretty cool. So the envelope's fairly standard. I'm not going to go too much into it. You also can zoom in and out of it as you please here with this little zoom guy. And you have up to 6 envelopes, so it shows you 3 by default, but if you start adding more, more will appear until you get to the 6th, and then it will offer you no more envelopes. The same basic idea is true for the LFO. So LFO you can also preview, same with the macros or whatever you want. Let's turn on the filter here, and I'll just show you some ways of more efficiently routing the modulation. So if I drag my LFO over here, it will by default be unipolar, so it will only go upwards. And then if I come in here to the mod matrix, I can make a bipolar by selecting this bipolar one. And now you can see it's bipolar. The other way you can make a bipolar is if you hold a modifier, so it doesn't seem to matter which one. So you can hold Control, you can hold Alt, or you can hold Shift on Windows, and it will bipolar modulate. So you just gotta hold the modulator down. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention there, with the envelopes as well, you can delay them. So you've got an attack phase here, but you can also delay the full envelope. So when I hold down a key, you can see when I hold down the key down here, it takes a second for the amplitude envelope to come on. Just forgot to mention that. So back to the LFOs here. The LFOs, you have 6 obviously of the envelopes. You have 8 LFOs. The same idea applies, where if you drag, if you just keep dragging, they keep appearing until you get to the 8th LFO, and then it's had enough and it doesn't offer you anymore. So up here at the top, you've got your drawing modes, so you can sort of paint in different kinds of steps. So if you've got this turned off, you're just going to be editing the lines and editing these individual points and drawing points in. Whereas if you turn this on, you're now painting. This is true of many of the editors. So if, for instance, if you come into the matrix here and you want a mod remap, you can do a similar thing here where you have a paintbrush and you can draw in different shapes. So there's a couple of options here with the paintbrush. You can have a step, just a regular step mod. You can have half steps, you can have down, sort of saw wave type things. You can have up saw waves, and you can have triangles. Then if you want to modify those shapes, there's this curve parameter here, which will change the curve of the shape. So you can see it's more like a sine wave there, and the down and up arrows are kind of more curvular. So yeah, that's the painting part of the LFO. It's very intuitive to use. The other thing is, if you want to change the grid divisions here, you can up the grid here horizontally and vertically. So on the x-axis here, you can bring it up to 32, and on the y-axis here, you can bring it up to 24, which is useful for doing things like making arpeggiations or sequences. So yeah, once you've got the grid line set, you can draw in sort of whatever parameters you kind of want to draw in here, or whatever shapes you want to draw in. And obviously you can edit this to be whatever you want. So on the LFOs then, if you're drawing in points, you can sort of move them around freely, or you can snap them to the grid if you've got the grid set up here. So you can see it lets you move them freely, but then once you get close to one of the points, it will kind of snap to that. So you can right click as well, so you can enter the value. So this will be the height. So let's say, 29 or whatever. You can see it'll go up to the top there. You can also enter the phase value, which is going to be sort of left to right. So let's set that, and that will change it. You can also remove point, or you can set start point as well, which will move the phase of the LFO to the point you've selected. So the phase of the LFO, you can manually select the phase of the LFO. If it's re-triggering each time, you can set where you want it to start. And also you can freeze the LFO, and you can manually move through the LFO with this as well. Set start point will just set the phase of the LFO to the point that you've selected. Then you got some options for the overall LFO. So you can save this to your LFO presets, which are up here. See, there's a bunch of LFO presets in here, and you can save your own into a user folder. You can also import LFO from a file or export it. And you can do things like flip it vertically or horizontally, so you can change up the LFO shape that you've already got. And yeah, that's pretty much it in terms of editing the LFOs. They're pretty intuitive to edit, and you've got a lot of kind of options for what you can do with them between the steps and the manual editing. So the bottom layer of the controls here for the LFO, as I explained. So if you've got it set to the trigger mode here, it's going to start from whatever phase point you set. So by default, it's set to the start phase point. And you can move that yourself, so that every time the LFO starts, it will start in the space you have selected. As I showed you before, you can also select a point and set that as the start point. I selected the wrong point there. Oh, let me turn off the drawn. So I select this point and I go set start point, and then we'll always start from there. So you got a couple of different ways that this can be set up. So you can set it as a trigger here, and then every time you hit a key, it's going to start from your start phase point, and then you can set it to sync, in which case this LFO will just keep running in the background. So you can see when I hit a key, it just starts from wherever the LFO is currently running at. So it's basically like what would be called free running is usually what they call it in other synthesizers. You can set it as an envelope, and setting it as an envelope will mean that it will run through the LFO cycle once and then it will stop. So instead of just continually running over and over again, it'll just play it once. So let's just attach that to, say, the page, as opposed to what it would do in trigger mode, where it just keeps running. So the other option here is the sustain envelope. If you set it to the sustain envelope, what it will do is it will run through the LFO, and it will sustain as long as you hold the key wherever you've got this phase set. So if I hit the key, it's going to sustain at the very end if I've got the phase set there. But if I pull it back to, say, here, it's going to sustain at that point. So next you got loop point. What loop point does is it will loop from wherever you've got the sustain point set here until the final point in the LFO. So I'll show you that now. And of course you can modulate the phase here as well, and you can change it in real time. So that's loop point. And then loop hold is essentially the opposite of that, where it will loop from the start until the loop point and then just continue looping. So I'll show you that now. So then you can get some cool effects with that as well by just modulating this this phase value. And of course that can be attached to pretty much anything you want it to be attached to. So that is all of the different modes that the LFO can run in. You can also change the frequency here, so you can set it pretty much to whatever division you want, and then you set here whether you want it in seconds, if you want it set just to the straight tempo, or if you want it to be dotted or in triplets. You can also key track it, where it will play. So let's just reset this patch. So we get this default triangle envelope, and let's set this to, so frequency modulation, just in case you don't know, is usually done by modulating the phase. So let's bipolar modulate the phase of oscillator 1 here. So you can hear now we're really slowly modulating the pitch because we're modulating the phase. So what we can do is set it to key track. And now we're basically using this LFO1 here to FM the oscillator 1. So let's switch it to a sine wave here, and let's turn the smoothing down so the effect is kind of more dramatic. And then we've got control over the pitch offset. So right now it's -12 below the note I'm playing, which is down here. So I can change that. So in that way you can do FM. The other thing I want to show you here is if you go into the mod matrix as well. So right now in here in the mod matrix, you can see we're using this LFO here to modulate the phase of oscillator 1. And because we're at audio rate, we're doing FM. But we can also come in here to this mod map and further change the shape here. So, or we could even weigh up these values. And of course, you can also attach this to stuff like, for instance, if I remove it from the phase here. So let's turn that off. So you can turn modulation off just by hitting this X button here, but if you hit the number, it will turn into an X. So let's use this instead of doing. Let's just load up the basic shapes here, and let's go to a saw wave. So let's do filter FM instead. So let's bring this LFO over and modulate this filter. And the same thing is true here. We can go into this map matrix and just make some crazy shape. So yeah, lots of weird audio rate modulation potential with the LFO here. So yeah, then beyond that, that's all of the settings for the frequency. Then we've got this smooth value, which will smooth out the LFO. So it will, let's say we add a lot of jagged points in here. Let's actually just load up something that's kind of like that. So this would be perfect. Let's take that and modulate the pitch. Let's slow it down a bit. So at zero smoothing, it's just changing those values automatically. And then if we turn up the smoothing, it's interpolating between the values there instead of just moving directly between them. So if you click on this smooth parameter here, you get an option for fade in as well. And if you turn this up, this will fade in the LFO. So let's do something a little bit faster here. So now I'll show you the fade in. So here, if I don't have any fade in turned on, it sounds like this. And if I turn up the fade in, it fades in over time. There's also a delay, which will, if I turn the fade in off, it will basically set a time for before the envelope starts. And then it will come on. And then here's a really cool one. This is the stereo option. So let's just initialize this patch. And let's pull the LFO onto, say, the pitch. That's one of the easiest ways to show this off. And actually, let's modulate that pitch bipolar. So now we've got this. So now if we turn up the stereo, let's just pull down that modulation. Now if we pull up the stereo, we're offsetting where in the LFO each left and right side is. So you can see there's two separate lines running through the LFO here, one representing left and one representing right. So this is a really cool way to get stereo effects. You can do this with pitch, obviously, as an example, but you could also do it with, say, the wavetable amount, or, you know, how you've got your filter set up. Maybe, you know, we've got the filter here and we want to modulate it with the LFO. So now we're getting stereo LFO filters. And then let's bring that up into audio rate. So you get weird stereo effects. That's one of the coolest features of Vital, is that you can just make these LFO stereo. Okay, so on to the final part of the modulators here. This is a little bit simpler. These are all a little bit more basic. So we'll start over here with these ones. So note here is just going to, as pitch is probably not a good one to show this off on. So note here is just basically, as you move up in pitch on the keyboard, it's going to modulate up. So in this case, I've got it on the filter. Very basic. Velocity is the harder you hit a key, the... let's not use drive, let's use this as well. So the harder you hit a key, the more it's going to be modulated. Very simple as well. Lift here is basically when you release the key, this envelope is going to activate. So if I hold the key down, lift is doing nothing. And let's set a long release here so that we can hear what happens. And if I lift off, the pitch is going to raise. Let's pull that release down a bit. Yeah, so lift is useful for when you want something to happen when you lift off a key. So if you were, you know, trying to make a piano-like sound and you want sort of the sound of you lifting off the keys, you might want to play a sample when you release the key, and you would use lift for something like that. I'm sure there's other cool stuff you could use it for, but that's the only thing that comes to mind for myself. The next one here is octave note. So this is very similar to the note one, but it's split up into octaves, right? So if I let's pull it onto, I keep pulling it onto the drive and I'm meaning to pull it onto here. So if I play up the keyboard, it's resetting every time I go an octave up. So I start here at C, there's no modulation. And then as I move up, it basically just modulates up until the top of the octave and then it resets again. Pressure is channel pressure. If you've got a keyboard with aftertouch, you can use the aftertouch. So I'm engaging the aftertouch here, and that is modulating the filter. Slide, I think, is something to do with MPE. I don't have an MPE controller, so I can't show you that. Stereo just allows you to stereoize whatever you want. So the easiest thing to show it on here would be the pitch. So I can stereoize the pitch here. Let's pull up that filter. But you can do it for anything. You could do it for the filter as well. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, basically just stereoizes anything. Then you've got the random modulator here, which every time you hit a key is going to give you a random value. So just hitting keys, it's giving me a different value every time. And that is a good segue onto the random modulators, which are different from the random key modulator. So these random modulators are sort of like LFOs, but they generate random values. So I'm not going to go too into detail about the different modes here. I'll explain them briefly. But as I am not a programmer, I don't really know too much in detail. So sample hold is probably most commonly what you are used to hearing when you hear of a random modulator. It's not really a random modulator, but it's sort of what we think of mostly. So this basically is just going to run through in time. So if I set the frequency here to, let's just set it to seconds. It's just going to randomly spit out values at whatever time I've set it to. Then you've also got, you can also stereoize this. So that will offset in the two channels, but we'll leave that off for now. So yeah, you got sample and hold, which is just kind of basic jumping between values. Sine interpolate is basically the same thing, but it's smoothed instead of just jumping between the values. Then you've got purling. So purling is another way of generating a type of randomness. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to, in a way, make the sound more consistent. It's hard to explain really what it's doing, but if you look at it, the values it's spitting out are still random, but they're a lot more consistent than with, say, the sample and hold. They use purling, this kind of noise, to generate terrain and stuff a lot, because it creates sort of pockets of almost regularity, but they're still random. I also believe it is what was originally used to generate Minecraft worlds. So yeah, bit of fun there. So Lorenz attractor, again, is a very difficult one to explain. If you want to understand this one better, I think the best thing to do is actually just look up a video of a Lorenz attractor. There's like videos where they like simulate it, and it will show you kind of what it does. What it's like is it's like it's like your random value is like a planet, and it's orbiting two centers of gravity, and it basically spins in like sort of a figure eight pattern around them and creates values that are random but kind of predictable in a way. They sort of follow a pattern, but they're still never the same. You can see that when you look at it, but the best way to see it is to just look up a video of a Lorenz attractor, and you can see it and you're like, oh yeah, that's what it's doing. So it looks like this. So you can sort of see here how it seems to be attracted to 2 points of gravity almost. But yeah, as I said, just look that up. It's much better than me here failing at explaining it. So those are the random modulators. You've got more of those than you think, because you can get 4 of them if you drag them out. So you got 4 of those, and they all have separate options for that and for speed. And that's it. They're quite simple. And that's pretty much it for the modulators. Last thing we've got here is voices tab. So voices, let's just reset this. Okay, so voices here, you can set your max poly count. So you could set it to 1 and then it's mono. Or you can set it to however many you want. You could set it to, 2 or whatever, and then, if you hit a third voice, it will just kill it. We'll have a bit more of a look at this later on, because I'm going to show you some of the advanced voice settings over here, and that's a better time to talk about that. Velocity track just basically tells the synth whether or not it should look at velocity for volume. Spread is the overall spread of the patch. So if I turn on Unison here, you can hear it's nice and stereo. So that's a lot. So you can hear it's stereo. And if I turn on the spread, it's basically going to mono that out. And finally, we've got glide here. And that's just going to glide between notes. Let's turn it to mono just so we can hear it a bit better. So we'll turn that down to 1. So you can hear it's just gliding between the notes. Now, if I don't hold the notes at the same time, it won't glide. Unless I have always glide selected. Then it will. Then we've got legato. This will stop the... basically what this will do is it will have the voice take over from the previous voice instead of restarting. The easiest way to show this is with a filter. So let me just pull a envelope here onto a filter so you can see. We've got a filter that's sort of low passing over time. If I've got legato turned off and I hold the two keys at the same time, it's going to restart that envelope. But if I've got it turned on, I can move between the two of them and it will continue the envelope. But it will not if I hit the notes separately. So that's what legato does. And then octave scale, this makes it so that, so currently, if I have it turned on, it will scale the glide based on how many octaves I'm transversing. So, for instance, here is the sound in the same octave. And then here is the sound in two different octaves. So the sound is fairly comparable in terms of how long it's taken to move between notes. If I turn on octave scale, it's going to take significantly longer for the pitch to move between octaves than it does just between two notes in the same octave. So the best way is to hear it. So there's two notes in the same octave and then two in different. So it takes significantly longer, and then I'll turn that off. And it's a comparable time to if they were in the same octave. Then you've got a slope. This just allows you to set the glide time. So if you want it to be, you know, more subtle at the start and then ramp up, or if you want it to be more like that. So next we got the effects. So we're gonna go into the effects, but I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on them. I'm gonna make it so that you understand what every effect does and the basic controls. But that's about it. So we have first got the chorus. Chorus is very similar to Unison and how it works. So for that reason, we will turn the Unison off, or we're not going to really hear what's happening. So if we turn it on, we're sort of getting a Unison effect where it's multiplying our signal by a certain number of voices. By default, it's set to 16, but you can set it as low as 4. Then you've got the frequency at which those voices are moving around in pitch. So if I set this to be, you know, really fast, let's set it to... So you can hear really slow pitch movement. They're just slightly drifting. And then if you set it really high, they're really moving. Then the depth there is how much of that movement is happening. And then with this chorus, we've basically got two sort of delay lines that are morphing around each other. So part of the chorus is the detuning, and part of it is the fact that we're delaying the signal by a very short amount of time, and that's creating a stereo effect. So these two delay effects basically allow us to offset that delay, so we can make it much tighter, or we can make it much longer. So you can sort of hear the separation happening there. Feedback. Is setting the feedback of those delays. It has the effect of kind of making the chorus sound more resonant. Then you've got a mix, which just mixes the effect. And cutoff, which is going to allow you to basically filter the effects of the cutoff. If we change the spread here, you can see what's actually happening is we've got a band pass filter here that we can change the width of. So you can hear the wet effect now is being filtered. And the cutoff just changes where that band pass filter is. And that's the chorus. Next we got the compressor. Okay, so I've loaded in a sound to kind of better show this off. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch from, it defaults here in multi-band mode. We're going to switch to single band mode just so we can understand what both of these things are doing here. So this is based on OTT in its multi-band mode, and OTT is a compressor and an expander, I guess. So it's not exactly doing the exact same thing as the OTT is, but it's achieving a similar result. So what's going on here? So we're going to forget about this second band here, this bottom band for a second, or this second, let's just call it bar for now. And we're going to focus on this top one. So I've got a sound coming through here, and it's just a kick I've loaded into the sampler. And I've got a little bit of reverb on it, and I'll explain why that is in a second. So what we've got here is a compressor. So this top one is a compressor, and this setting here is its threshold. So as we bring the threshold down, it's the same way a compressor works. Now, what we've got here with these bars, so if you go into this and you drag, you're going to see these bars sort of increase and get denser, and it gets greener, and then it's going to disperse until eventually it turns gray. When it turns gray, it's off, so the ratio of compression is basically 0. And then look what happens as I drag this up. It's starting to compress the signal. And if I pull up the threshold here, so this is basically just a compressor. We've got a threshold here, and you've got your ratio. So same as a standard compressor, and then you have an input gain over here. And you've got attack and release. So that's all that is. I'm not going to go into, how to compress or whatever. That's kind of a separate issue. But you can see there what this is. This is basically just a compressor. So let's turn that off and let's bring up this. So what's this? This is an expander. And same thing here. You've got your ratio. And you've got the amount it's doing here. Or sorry, you've got your threshold here. And then you've got the ratio of the expansion. So you can see, when I pull it back, it's doing basically nothing. Let's reduce the release here. And when I pull it up, it's basically making the quieter frequencies way louder. So you can hear that reverb that I've got mixed in. It's quite quiet when I've got this ratio down here. But when I pull it up, it's bringing up those quiet signals really loud. So that's all that these bands are doing. So you got a threshold here. I think I might have misspoken and said ratio a second ago when I was talking about the compressor. But you've got your threshold here, and then you've got your ratio inside with the bars. And it's the exact same. We bring down the compressor. We got our threshold here where the compression starts, and then the ratio of the compression. And those two things are put together, and the time of them is controlled with the attack and release values over here. Then you got a mix, and that's basically what this does. Then you can bring it into multiband mode, which is basically doing that for each band. So depending on the values you've got set here, which again, I'm not going to go into detail on how you would set this, but depending on the values you've got, you're going to accentuate and compress different frequencies differently. So it works very similar to OTT. So if we pull up, let's just pull up the initial preset there, and let's make it like a Unison sort of thing. I'll pull that down a bit. So you can hear if I just turn on the default preset, it very much has that OTT sound, where it's kind of squashing everything and sort of brightening it as well. So you got multiband, which is 3 bands. You got high band and low band, which basically just compress things differently. So with the low band, you're focusing on a low band that you're compressing by itself, and high band, you're focusing on the high band. And that's pretty much all I'm going to go into with it. Oh yeah, one more thing. You are setting the input levels for each of the bands here. If we go to multiband, you're setting the input levels here at this area, and then you've got the mix. And that's everything there is to know about the compressor OTT hybrid thing that's in here. Then you got a delay, just a standard delay. So you've got the frequency that you that your delay is happening at here. In this case it's 8ths, but you can change it to be whatever you want. You can have it be mono, stereo, which will give you 2 delay paths which can be independently timed. So then you got ping pong here, which does ping pong delay. You got 2 different options for your ping pong. You got ping pong and mid ping pong, where I believe it goes into the center as well. So yeah, it's basically you get 1 each side and 1 to the center with mid ping pong, and ping pong just goes left to right with your delays. Then you got your feedback, which is how long it's going to last. And you've got your mix. Then you've got the same filter that you have in the chorus, so you can filter the delay lines with this bandpass filter that you can move around. Of course, you can modulate that as well if you want, and that's everything you need to know about the delay. The distortion has a couple of wave shaping modes in here. I'm not going to go too in detail. Let's just feed a sine wave through this. We can have a quick look at what it's doing. Basic shapes here. And let's turn off that unison. So, the distortion here, you got a soft clip, you got a hard clip, linear fold, so you got some wave shaping, wave folding stuff in here. You got a bit crusher, and you got a sample rate reducer. Not a whole lot to know about it. It's basically just a wave shaper distortion combo thing. You got a drive here, you got a mix, and then you got a filter here, which is just an extra filter that you can either put before the distortion or you can put it after the distortion. And that is the distortion. EQ here is an EQ. So EQ, by default, it has a high and low shelf here. So let's not use a sine wave because that's not a great way to show off an EQ. So by default here, it's got low shelf, high shelf, and a bell in the middle. You can also, if you click these, you can change them to be high and low pass instead of shelf. You control the resonance, the cutoff, and whatever of whichever peak you've got selected. So once you've selected it, you get the controls here. That's the EQ. Let's move on from that. This is the filter. I don't need to explain this. It's the exact same as the filter that is here in the voice section. So anything that is happens with that filter is also the same with this. We've got a flanger here, which is a stereo flanger. So you've got frequency, which you can obviously, one second. So you've got a frequency here, which is how fast the flanger is moving. Goes from extremely slow to extremely fast. You can put it in deep beat divisions if you want. You can offset the left and the right channels timing against each other. Or you can bring them closer together. Then you've got a feedback, which is basically how resonant the flanger is. And you can go into the minus as well, which will give you a negative flanger. You've got a mix, which mixes the effect in, obviously. Then you got a center. This is basically like sort of a cutoff if the flanger was a filter, where you can change where in the frequency spectrum it's happening. Then you got a depth. The depth is controlling to what degree the internal LFO is moving the flanger around. So if you basically if you set this to 0, the flanger is just static, and you can move it yourself with the center here. And that is pretty much everything there is to know about the flanger. Then you got a phaser. This is very, very similar. So it's so similar that it doesn't even really bear going into. But you have a control up here where you can add more notches to the phaser. Then you've got an offset here, which is going to offset the left and right channel against each other. Or you can have them be the same. Feedback, same as the flanger, controls the resonance. Center, exact same as the flanger. And mix. Mixes in the effect. Depth, again, controls the internal LFO. So you can set it to be a static phaser and move it yourself with the center frequency. Then finally, you've got reverb. So reverb has a pre-high cut and a pre-low cut filter. So let's bring the mix in. This is just going to affect what frequencies are going through the reverb. Let's bring that time way up and the mix up too. So you've got a pre-low cut and a pre-high cut. This is just going to affect what frequencies are going to be coming through the reverb. Then we've got additional EQ controls here to EQ the reverb with a high and low shelf. It's just going to change the character of it. So you might want to pull some of the lows out, pull some of the highs out. It's up to you, however you want the reverb to sound. You've got a chorus amount. This basically puts a chorus on the reverb, so it kind of disperses the reverb over time and makes it sound a bit more natural. Then you've got a delay here. I believe this is a pre-delay, so this kind of sets when the reverb is going to come in after it receives sound. So you can see if you've got it set to the max here, there's a bit of a dry signal. And then the reverb starts, you've got it set way down here. Reverb just starts straight away. Mix control mixes the effect. Then chorus frequency. Same as the whole idea in the chorus itself, where we're setting the frequency at which the kind of pitch, the delays are modulating against each other, which is giving sort of a pitch change in effect. Then you've got the size parameter here. This is basically sort of giving you control over how big the room feels. So you're going to get much more of a room sound when it's low, much more of an ambient sort of a sound. And then much more of a kind of concert hall sort of idea as the size is brought up. And the time is the decay of the reverb, so how long it's going to last. So next we've got the mod matrix. There's actually not that much to talk about here. We've covered most of what's important already, but we'll still have a little look at it. A couple of things to note about the mod matrix. First and foremost, the mod matrix has up to 64 slots. If you try to put 65 things in there, it will not allow you to. So let's reset the patch here, and we'll just have just one look at what we can do within the mod matrix. So I've just got a modulator on the pitch here, just because it's an easy way to show things off. So let's just mess about with this. So I'm gonna make 16, turn this into 16th notes, and I'm going to make it 12 here, so I've got a full octave to mess around with. And then I'm going to set my LFO here to be 1 bar, and it's just going to be a straight shot, it's going to play straight through here. So the first thing I want to show off is this remapping. So any parameter that you modulate by something can be remapped. So you can draw whatever shape you want in here, and then it will follow that shape. So you could have this LFO, that has this shape, and then you could be putting that through a sequence. So let's draw in sort of a... So let's make sure that we've got our octave here. Let's make sure that this is set to 12. So I'm just going to control click this, and that's going to let me enter a value. I'm going to enter 12, so that's going to be 12 semitone. So just as an example here, I've drawn in just sort of a sequence. So I've got it set to 12 here on the vertical axis because I want access to the 12 notes that I'm modulating here on the pitch. And I've got it set to 16 across so that it's basically the notes are happening in 16ths. And then when I play a note, I basically get a sequence, and I can mess around with whatever notes I want to mess around with there. Currently this is just going straight, so it's playing straight through. It's playing 1 bar. So if I half this now, or double it rather, now I'm getting 30-second notes. Okay, and I can put it way up to the point where it's nearly audio rate. I can also, whatever I do with the shape here is going to make a massive difference. So let's change the shape slightly. So you're basically getting two modulators for one. So I could use this LFO to modulate a bunch of other things. So for instance, I could also use it to modulate, let's say, let's modulate something like the harmonic stretch here. And let's remap that too. So I can remap that maybe where, let's do a sequence again. So now these are being modulated by the same LFO, but they have a completely different shape happening. Or even maybe I don't want this to be a sequence. Maybe I want it to be something like this. So yeah, there's like a bunch of different things. You could have one LFO doing multiple modulations to multiple different destinations. Just in case, just to mention it again, you can stereoize things in here. So that will just stereoize it. You can turn them bipolar or make them unipolar, depending on whether this bipolar is selected or not. You can turn them off here by hitting the letter, and you can change the amount here. So you can change it negative or positive, and if you hit Alt and click, you can enter the value manually. Now you can also choose other destinations in here, so you can manually choose, say, stuff in oscillator 1, including some stuff that's not apparent. So there's stuff that you won't necessarily see on the front panel that you can actually modulate from in here. So yeah, it's worth going through here and just having a look at some of the stuff you can modulate. Most of it is on the front panel, but there are some things in here that you might come across that you may want to modulate that you didn't see. So that is the mod matrix. Okay, so finally for the tabs, we are going to go through the advanced tabs. So we're going to jump into the Unison stuff in a second, but let's just go through the basic stuff first. So in the advanced tab here, for the oscillators advanced options, we need to first have them activated. So if you turn on all the oscillators, you'll see that you have access to all of their individual stuff over here. But for now, let's just focus on one. So a couple of the things that you can do in here first is you can turn off note tracking. So no matter what key you hit, it's always going to be the same note. There's some reasons that you would want that for sound design, but I'm not going to go into them right now. You can also turn on high resolution wavetables, which is going to give a higher resolution of wavetable at the cost of some sort of CPU efficiency. And then finally, if we turn on Unison, you're going to get the advanced options for Unison here. So there's a couple of options for Unison. We're going to get into these in just a second, and we'll just focus on these. So the first thing is you can increase the range of the Unison from 2 semitones to 48, or you can decrease it to, you know, less than that, depending on what you want. Unison blend, this is basically a mix control for your Unison. And stereo Unison will let you control how stereo the Unison is. So it can be completely mono, or it can be more wider. Then you've got table spread. Table spread is going to take the wavetable parameter here. So let's get a wavetable. That'll be good. So what that's going to do, let's pull down the pitch so we can just focus on what those are doing. So now if I spread the table, each Unison voice is going to get its own part of the wavetable here. So certain voices are going to be like this, certain voices are going to be like that, and so on in the harmonic series. So that's that. Then you've got spectrum. So if I turn on, say, would probably want a different waveform for this. So if I turn on, say, vocode here, and I spectral spread it, it's basically just going to spread it out like this among the voices, and it's the same for anything. So if I go for inharmonic stretch here, it's going to spread those amongst the Unison voices. Some of them are quite weird. So for instance, if you go for like smear or even random amplitudes, it's going to be madness. So let's spread that out. So you can get really like additive complex sounds by doing this. And actually doing this without any detuning is a good way to get like if you want to make like music box sounds or something like that, and you want like a really metallic attack, this is a good way to do that. Then it's probably obvious, but the last one here is the distortion spread. So say we've got the formant here. So our formant we can spread out the same way. So yeah, that's everything for the sort of advanced wavetable section over here. Then you've got different modes. So let's turn the pitch back up. So right now I've just got a basic Unison set up here. Now there's a couple other modes here. So you can center drop 12. This will basically add a sub note, so a note that is an octave below. Same thing but 2 octaves below. Then you've got an octave, which is going to put an octave on top. By the way, the detune range doesn't affect any of this stuff. Then you've got 2 octave, which is going to add something 2 octaves above. Then you've got a power chord, which is going to add a 5th above, like a power chord on a guitar. Then you got 2x power chord, which is going to add that plus octaved. Then you got a major chord. So each note will generate a major chord, minor chord. Each note will generate a minor chord. Then you get harmonics. So the best way to look at this is if we use a sine wave. Let's go to basic shapes. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the spread here on the sine wave to 100%. And then I'm going to move this detune. And you can see the voices here are spreading out in harmonics. And then we've got the same but for odd harmonics. So it's sort of weird, but it's cool because you can get like additive or really metallic kind of sounds out of this, and then you can like, you know, use one oscillator to FM another, and it has this weird additive sound to it. So it serves a purpose. It's pretty cool. Anyway, let's initialize the patch once again. And we are going to have a look at the voice section. So very quickly before we move on to that, there's an analyzer here, which I'm sure is obvious. One of them shows the frequency spectrum. One of them is an oscilloscope. Oversampling here. Oversampling is a way of reducing aliasing. It's an important part of digital processing to get a high quality sound. Basically, if you're using a lot of distortion, FM, lots of crazy stuff, you might want to put your oversampling up, you know, to either 4x or 8x so that you don't get any aliasing. Or if you're having CPU issues and you're not ready to bounce your track yet, you could put it on draft mode here, which is going to have a little bit less quality, but it's going to save you some CPU. Up here at the 8x range, you're going to have some significant CPU issues, especially if you're using a lot of voices. Then we've got no priority. This basically affects the way that notes take over each other if you've exceeded your voice count. So if we set our synth to mono, I can't play more than one note at a time now. Round robin, if we add 2 notes in here. So now I'm able to hold 2 notes down. And if I add another note, it's got to get rid of one. So how does it pick which one it's going to get rid of? Well, in round robin mode, it just cycles them. So it just picks one, and then it picks the other one, and then it picks one, and it does that, you know, depending on how many voices you've got set. But there are other more specific ways that we can do that. So we can go newest, which let's just go mono, which is always going to add the newest note, whether it's higher or lower. It's always going to be added. Then we've got oldest, which is it's always going to hold the first note that we held down. No matter what I do on my keyboard, it's always going to hold that oldest note. Then we've got highest, which is always going to hold the highest note. So if I add a note below, it's not going to go in there because it's focused on the higher notes. Lowest, probably pretty self-explanatory. It's the lowest note. And then we're back to round robin. Then we've got this voice override. So the easiest way to show this is if I add an envelope to a filter. So if I add the envelope here to the filter, you can hear that when I have it on kill here, and I hold down a note, even if I've got the note held down, it's gonna restart that filter envelope. But if I go to steal, it's just going to continue on the decay phase. So if I raise this attack way up, so yeah, that's what that voice stealing does. Let's just initialize that patch again. Then we've got MPE enabled. If you've got an MPE controller, you're going to need to turn that on for it to work properly. I'm not going to go into that because I don't have one. Then your tuning and transpose is on the master level. So instead of doing it per oscillator, here you can do it to all oscillators at once. You can fine tune them, or you can tune them by semitone. And that is pretty much it for the advanced tab. So we have finally made it on to the Wavetable Editor. I don't know how far in we are at this point, but I think it's a long time. So here we are. We're gonna go into this in relative detail, but I'm not really gonna go through, you know, different reasons why you might choose something over another, but we're gonna kind of understand everything. So the Wavetable Editor kind of works like video editing. If you've done that before, you create keyframes and then you give each of those keyframes parameters, and then you can morph between those keyframes. So let's just get rid of this source here. So let's remove the source, and we've got 3 different types of sources. We're going to skip over audio file source for now because we're going to do something with that in a minute. We're going to go to wave source. So wave source here is going to allow us to sort of connect the dots here to draw in an oscillator if we want to. We just hold our mouse cursor and drag between these dots and we make a waveform. And then we want to morph to something else. So we go create keyframe here. And then on this keyframe, if we've got it selected, we can do something else. So let's reset this. Okay, so we're just going to create a sine wave here. So let me just put 1 harmonic in. And now we have got a sine wave. So now we morph between these. So we're going from this shape to our sine wave shape. And we can drag where that is, how long we want that to be or whatever. So we can put this way at the end, or we could create another keyframe here and we could create a more complicated wave. So let's create, you know, something weird by drawing in. Basically what these are is you're drawing in harmonics. This is your fundamental here, which is your lowest harmonic. And then you can zoom way out and draw sort of crazy shapes here. And then you can morph between them. And then let's create another keyframe here by double clicking. And on this keyframe, let's get rid of everything. So let's clear the wave. So on this last keyframe here, let's just have a look at some of the options here. So we've got different ways of viewing this. So first of all, we could hit power scale here. And with power scale, if I've got all my harmonics turned up, we've got a saw wave. So let me just show you the zoom here. So you can zoom 1x, 16x. So this is going to zoom you in so you can edit the harmonics on the lower level a bit better, or you can zoom way out. So just some controls for the zoom in there. Then you've also got this amplitude scale. And what this does is instead of, it's the same thing. It's not changing the sound, but what it's doing is it's having giving us a different way of looking at the sound. So it's kind of changing the way that these frequencies are weighted. So now in the higher frequencies, my changes will make sort of a bigger difference, I guess. So now instead of all of the frequencies being set to the top being a saw wave, it's now way more weighted towards the high frequencies. So it's just a different way of viewing it, a different way of editing it. You may, you know, prefer that or not prefer it so much, but the regular way here, the power scale, this is weighting the lower frequencies more than the higher frequencies. So if you were to be drawing the waveform in here, you can change the grid amount. So on this first one here where I've drawn the wave, I can increase the grid resolution here, and that will let me draw, I suppose, different kind of shapes. Or you can decrease it to almost nothing, and then you can just draw like this. So now I've got it set to 0. It's just letting me free draw whatever I want. And then the other option you've got in here is you've got the blend mode. So some of these are blending between the waves in terms of changing these frequencies individually. Some of them are crossfading. I'm not going to go too much into them because, to be honest, it's really case by case on what sounds best, which one you select, but they do sound slightly different depending on the material that you have. But yeah, that's pretty much all the options you get here in the wave source. So the other one you've got here is line source. Now line source basically allows you to edit. It takes out this FTT part here. You can't no longer use this. But it allows you to kind of draw in your waveform like your LFO kind of works. So it's like the LFO editor, and you can of course do grid or whatever as well, but you just draw it like your LFO. And pull power, I don't know. And this will allow you to draw waves as well. And of course you can crossfade between them. So I can add another keyframe here. And on this keyframe, I could, let's just go over to this keyframe. On this keyframe here at the end, we could just change the shape up a lot. Now what's cool about this, and what you can see me doing here, is I've got these stacked on top of each other. So this line source is sort of shaping my primary source up here, which is the wave that I drew in the FTT editor up here. So yeah, you can stack a bunch of these sources on top of each other, and you can import your own samples and use those as wavetables as well, which I'll show in a second. Just before I move on to using the audio file source here, let's just have a look at some of the modifiers. So you got a bunch of modifiers here that you can use. These basically just edit the waves you've already got. So I've got this wavetable loaded up here, and I can load in this phase shift. So what this does basically is allows me to mess with the phase. So I can set two keyframes here. This first one is going to be just normal, and the second one here, I'm going to shift the phase over to there. So you can see now the phase is shifting as I'm moving through the wavetable, which can be a cool effect. You got a bunch of different ways of going through that. With the phase, you've got like even and odd and harmonic and stuff like that. So just different ways of messing with the phase. So yeah, that's probably the most basic of the modifiers. Then let's remove that one, and let's add this wave window. So this wave window one here basically allows you to window the waveform, which is sort of what happens when you do amplitude modulation. Is it sort of brings in the amplitude of the starting and end of the wave cycle. So you can edit that. There's a couple of different shapes here. Some of them are more extreme than others. Now obviously you can just have one, so it'll just go over the whole wavetable there, or we can morph. So we could maybe change the way that we've got it set up here towards the end and decrease the window size or increase it. So that's just another cool way that you can edit your wavetable there. Then we've got a slew limiter. So the slew limiter here is this is sort of it's used in the modular world to even out signals, and this basically has the effect of simplifying the wave. So you can see as I pull it up, it's just sort of almost smoothing the wave out. So same thing with that. You can create keyframes, you can modulate by different amounts. Maybe you want to smooth the wave out over time or something like that. It's kind of one of the simpler ones, but definitely good to have in there. The next one is the wave folder. The wave folder will fold the wave back in on itself, creating sort of a distortion, FM sort of an idea. And of course you can modulate this as well, so we can create multiple keyframes here, where the second keyframe is, you know, more wave folded than the first. And yeah, there's another modifier. So what we've got next here is the wave warp. So wave warp here is basically distorting up the waveform again. It's sort of like your bend plus and minuses, or that kind of an idea. So you've got, you can warp the wave on the X and Y axis. And you can also do it, so by default they're symmetrical, so it keeps the warping symmetrical, or you can go asymmetrically and do these kind of crazy bends. And the same here on the Y axis. So obviously again, you can create keyframes here and have different. So yeah, just a bunch of different ways that you can modulate your wavetable. So you can have a bunch of these stacked on top of each other, as many as you want, really. You can even have multiple instances of the same thing happening, and you can have, you know, keyframes all over the place of different stuff happening. So you can take, you know, maybe relatively simple wavetables and make them sound absolutely shit or more complex, whatever you want to call it. So finally here, let's just have a look at importing things and using those as wavetables. So when you drag a sample in here, you have an option of whether you want to wavetable it, vocode it, or pitch slice it. These are just different ways of managing the phase when the wavetable is imported, and sometimes they sound different, but sometimes some will sound better on different sources. Let's just have a look. So we'll load this in first as a wavetable. I don't know what the original sample is. So that's it loaded in as a wavetable. This is a kick. Let's load it in as vocode, see if it sounds different. So it sounds significantly different, and let's load it in as pitch splice. So that's sounding different again. So let's just bring in something as a wavetable here. So this is like a loop. So let's go into let's get a snare actually. I think snares are a good way of showing this off. So let's see what I got here. Any of these will do, to be honest. So yeah, let's pull in this snare here. So now we got this snare loaded in as a wavetable. So let's go into the Wavetable Editor. We've got a couple of different options. You can see by default it's giving us 2 keyframes. What it's doing here is the first keyframe here is set to the start of the sample, and the last one here is set to the end of the sample. And if we want, we could change the last one here, because there's a bunch of silence at the end. Let's move it to, say, here, and let's normalize so that the volume is more consistent. So now this is what we've got. So that, once you click on here, you can see the position here is set to 0, 0, and the position here is set to 3, 7, whatever. So where you've got this number set is where in the waveform it is. And then you've also got window size, which is how much space is this window of the wavetables taken up. So the easiest way to sort of have a look at that is, let's make the window size like, instead of being 2000, let's make it 300. So you can see now here, this purple part has got way smaller than it was when previously. So now it's going to be significantly different sounding. So now we're basically taking much more samples of this sample and turning them into wavetables. Then we've also got, let's bring it up to like double what it was, to 4000. And now there's almost, you know, there's much less material there, because if you look here on the first wave here alone, it's showing us almost the whole sample here. So let's bring it down to somewhere in the middle. Let's bring it down to, say, 1200. So So you can see once you get it in here, you might want to mess around with the window size to get the best result, because it can sound completely different depending on how you've got the window size set. So then you've got the window fade here, which basically is fading between your different windows that you've got set up here in the window size. So again, depending on your material, you may want to set that lower or higher. Then you've got your blend mode here, which is, again, are you doing spectral blend? Are you doing no blending, which will just jump between the waveforms like this? And then you've got time blend, which I think is just crossfading, and file blend. I'm not sure what it does exactly, but usually you want to play around with all the different blend modes to see which one sounds the best. Then you've got your phase style, and this is a bit familiar because this is actually what we're doing when we're importing. So when we're selecting Wavetable here, let's go back there. When we're selecting Wavetable here, so see if I bring that in again as a wavetable. When I bring it in as a wavetable and I go into the Wavetable Editor, you can see the phase style is set to none. And let's bring it in again and set it to vocode. And you can see that the phase style is set to vocode. And then if I bring it in again and set it to pitch splice, you can see that the phase style is set to none. So even if you bring it in as vocode and you want to switch it over to wavetable, you can do that. All you do is change the phase style. And that's pretty much it, yeah. You can obviously add the modifiers here. So we can add, you know, a filter here, which I actually think I forgot to cover when I was talking about the modifiers, but this is basically just, you know, low pass, high pass, band pass, comb. Different filters that you can apply and modulate over time and change their shape. And you can add, you know, say your wave folder or whatever. So let's just wavefold that a bit. And you can even add another source, like say your line source, and maybe you want to make that like that, and then you want to make another one over here, and you want to make it like something weirder. Something like that. So yeah, you can make all sorts of weird wavetables. It's a really interesting way of approaching it, like layering effects on top of each other, and then you almost have wavetables on top of modifiers that are also kind of wavetables. But that, I believe, will conclude our Vital journey. I think we've pretty much covered absolutely everything in the synth, which, if you've stuck around for the entirety of this, I commend you. Hopefully you have found this helpful, and it has taught you something. And if it has, and you spent the last 2 hours with me, please consider leaving a like. Give me a subscribe. There'll be some sound design tutorials coming up for Vital. But until I see you again, I hope you have a fantastic day, week, year. And I hope your music is sick and you top the charts. Goodbye.